The Forked Ways. The paths of the world twist and turn. They divide and converge, taking you to unexpected places. The tale you are about to hear is a Southern Gothic ghost story. It is also a gay romance. Week by week, the chapters will unfold, taking you to the haunted town of Assembly and the strange lands around it. This is not a professional recording. I am not a professional writer, but I have a tale to tell. So if you find yourself intrigued, put another log on the fire. Find a comfortable chair. Sit back. Relax. Listen. My dear mother, the only cloud on my horizon, I mean this in no menacing sense, is the prince. He is capable of talking for 2 hours upon end, developing his theory of everything under heaven from his first position, which is that there is no straight line. Robert Louis Stevenson. Letter dated March 28, 1874. Part 1. Down in Yon Forest. Each night is separate, slow and strange, and blessed with quiet water and the sound of wings. The years are grain upon the fields. They are a dark, swift smoke of stars, a flock of silver stones over which the moon rolls in uneasy sleep. In a hall at the world's end, a blue glass bottle rests on the sill of an open window. You and I are there together. You go first. No, you. One of us opens the bottle, takes a glass rod and stirs the contents gently. A drop clings to the tip of the rod, sparkling in the moonlight. It falls and splashes, releasing a fragrance of freshly turned earth, damp moss, and quiet water. A screen door squeaks and slams. Lamplight glimmers. The label on the bottle bears a curious sign. 3 circles, unlinked but inseparable. And it reads, The Forked Ways. Assembly, late summer, 1980. Chapter 1. Assembly. These woods are deep, Fletcher's father had told him earlier in the evening. But it wasn't just the woods. Everything here was deep. The town, the people, even the gaunt and secretive house which served as the pastorium for Assembly Chapel. Tonight he had decided to begin with the house itself. By day it appeared hollow and shabby, but there was a different feeling about it after dark. The worn linoleum of the kitchen floor, the doors that wouldn't quite close, the odd smell of creosote and mildew that lingered on the narrow back stairway. All these were lonely by daylight, but the house got interesting at night. Darkness cloaked the corners of the 3 or 4 well-lit rooms where he and his father spent the evenings, and darkness filled the other rooms completely. While his father read in the study, Fletch took an oil lamp from the living room mantel, removed the globe, and lit the wick with a match. The flame rose quickly, blue at the bottom, milky white at the top, and he had to turn the wick down before replacing the globe. The house had been built long before the days of electric lighting, and the thought had occurred to him that by using lamplight he might meet the house on its own terms. He moved from the living room back to the dining room, lifting the lamp cautiously at the short passage beyond the study, which led to the kitchen and back stairway. The back part of the house made him nervous, so Fletch decided to keep to the front. moving from the dining room into the central hallway at the foot of the main staircase. The house was very quiet. Through stained glass panes by the front door, he saw the headlights of a distant car passing along the highway. "Okay, old house," he thought. "I may be new here, but I'm no stranger. My relatives have lived here for 40 years, so let's get used to one another." The lamp raised in his left hand, the smooth wood of the banister slipping coolly beneath his right, Fletch took the stairs to the second floor. The steps turned midway at a broad landing and reverse direction, mounting to the central upstairs hall. The room he had chosen for his bedroom was just across the hall, at the very front of the second floor of the house. At his left, 2 other rooms opened on either side of the hall, while a third and larger room took up the back of the house. There, unreached by the flickering lamplight, the hallway turned to the right, terminating at a division of the back stairs, which led down to the kitchen and further up to a spacious attic. The doors to the 3 vacant rooms remained closed. The second floor had been vacant for almost a year, and the rooms still smelled stale and disused. His own room was the one he had been accustomed to occupy whenever he visited overnight as a child. He liked the fact that it was a corner room, with 2 tall windows and a fireplace. It was also adjacent to his favorite spot in the house, a smaller room which opened onto an outdoor balcony above the roof of the veranda. Along the walls, built-in shelves awaited his books. "Show me something," Fletch challenged. "If you want my friendship, show me a secret nobody else knows." Did a floorboard squeak? Did something move among the shadows in the hall, or was it only the flame of the lamp playing tricks? Fletch moved past the head of the stairs and followed the hall, wondering which room to enter. At last, he turned the glass doorknob of the unused room at the end of the hall, the room he thought of as the Yellow Room. It held 2 twin mahogany beds. A small rocking chair occupied the space near the window. The walls were pale yellow, and a broad yellow rug covered the center of the floor. There was one closet in the Yellow Room, the door slightly ajar. Fletch lifted the lamp and eased the door open with his foot, prepared to leap back if anything moved or made a noise. The back of the door was lined with angled shelves for storing shoes. More shelves lined the sides of the closet. The air was cool and smelled of camphor or mothballs. A few clothes hung in the closet, a scarf, a long black coat wrapped in plastic. Nestled in a hat box was a black derby with a wide brim. He lifted out the hat and tried it on, finding it fit him well. This was good. It made him feel as if he were beginning to belong. The only other items in the closet were some fabric-covered file boxes and a little wooden doll's house. Fletch remembered the toy house. It was actually a box crafted to look like a log cabin, the roof being the hinged lid. The papered interior was printed with pictures of a fireplace, snowshoes, a bare rug. He took down one of the file boxes and lifted out a brown ledger with pages lined in blue and red. Now here was something he had never seen. The ledger was filled with entries written in pencil, and inside it were folded sheets of paper showing a perspective view and floor plan for a house called the Ontario. A few minutes passed before Fletch realized that what he held was a drawing of the pastorium itself, made some 70 years before. A small shiver went through him. He stood up, holding the lamp aloft, looking at the shadows dancing along the walls and ceiling. "Thank you, house," he whispered. He thought back to the early part of the afternoon. He and his father had finally finished making the move from Atlanta. It had been incredibly hot. Mark Forrester had clapped a hand on his shoulder and heaved one of the heavy suitcases out of the back of the station wagon. "Why are you so glum all of a sudden, Fletch? I thought you were excited about getting out of the city for good." He set the suitcase down in the red-orange dirt of the driveway and spread his arms wide. "This is assembly. It's the absolute end of the world." Fletch didn't reply. He looked uneasily up at the house, which was supposed to be their home from now on. The sun bled through the dusty windows, drying the wood until it cracked, providing secret light for congregations of dead wasps under the attic rafters. Fletcher's father had grown up here during the years his own father had served as pastor. The church was up by the highway, separated from the house by 2 acres of tilting tombstones. Beyond the main part of the cemetery, older graves lay hidden within the fringe of the forest, marked only by cairns of fieldstones. Merritt Nelms came through the door and went to the car for another load of boxes, his broad, friendly face gleaming with sweat. "Don't listen to him, Fletch. Your daddy doesn't know what he's talking about. It's not the end of the world out here. It's the beginning." Josh Avery, older than Doc Merritt, was not so talkative, simply raised an eyebrow as he passed with a box of china balanced on his head. As usual, Josh was working a plug of tobacco. It moved back and forth between his left cheek and his right, the motion so incessant that Mark Forrester referred to it as the wandering chew. Without even being asked, Josh and Doc had appeared to help Fletch and his father move in, and Fletch knew that Florence Avery and Callie Nelms were over at the mill right now, preparing refreshments. Fletch picked up the last cardboard box and carried it up the broad front steps, across the veranda, and through the door into the front hall. They had opened the windows in most of the ground-floor rooms, but the curtains only hung motionless like exhausted ghosts. The countryside buzzed as if the trees bore winged insects rather than leaves. The rest of the houses in the community were away beyond the field, and the isolation was the only thing that suited Fletch just fine. Since his mother's death at the beginning of the year, he had drawn inward, and the presence of other people, even people who were kind, like Josh and Doc, often made him nervous. After they finished unloading the car, Fletch went around the house to the backyard. Moon Lake bordered the property there, and Fletch walked down to the edge of the water. The weeds were high, but the water had receded to well below the grass line, leaving a naked 3-foot scar where dirt daubers collected mud into little balls. They had built a complicated network of clay organ pipes under the eaves of the barn. The lake looked cool, and the forest around it seemed impenetrable. There was no noise of traffic, no sound of human life from the town, only the busy wasps and the insect trees and the infrequent splash of a fish. Leaving the lake shore, he continued circling the house and walking up the front drive to the highway. Dead honeysuckle choked the barbed wire fence at the side of the road, and a few cattle moved slowly in the Alderney dairy beyond. Even they appeared burdened by the day's heat. Assembly Chapel was freshly painted, old-fashioned and quaint, surrounded by shrubs of holly, gold dust plants, and tall hydrangeas. Fletch went up the stone steps and tried the wrought-iron latch of the left-hand set of doors. It was unlocked, but just as the door swung open, he grew dizzy. When he glanced back at the edge of the highway, the black asphalt seemed unsteady. The pasture beyond appeared to move, as if the ground beneath the tall grass were buckling. The cry of the insects took on a harsh and strident tone. A blue pickup truck roared around the curve of the road and sped by, carrying an iron cage on the back. Inside the cage, 4 men laughed and rattled the bars. Fletch reached up and touched his brow. A headache was beginning. Was it possible to disbelieve in God and yet believe in devils? The past 8 months vanished in a flash of memory. He saw a similar truck cross the center line and plow into the front of his family's car. His mother screamed. There was blood, too much blood. His head pushed through the car's window into a painless blaze of darkness. When he had awakened long later, the words of the doctors scarcely meant anything to him. Coma, 3 days. Sometimes he wished he had died there and escaped the new life which had been thrust upon him, its most prominent feature a gaping emptiness swallowing the place his mother had always filled. The sun wept on the road. The insects gnashed their teeth. Dad, Doc, and Josh approached through the rippling air. "We're heading over to the mill for something to drink. Do you want to come?" Fletch pulled the church door shut and followed the men along the dusty path through the common garden, keeping far enough behind that he wouldn't be obliged to participate in the conversation. Beyond the garden lay the town, and usually there were people out here in the morning and evening, hoeing weeds, gathering vegetables, or running the irrigation system. The assembly community all shared the produce, and what they didn't need was sold at the cooperative on Rowan Street. Doc Merritt opened the gate onto the alley between the co-op and the cafe. Doc's office was across the street, occupying one of the old brick buildings along with a barber and beauty shop, which still maintained separate entrances for men and women. They turned left and walked 2 blocks down to the Nelms Mill on Vagabond Creek. The most picturesque building in town, the mill was graced with terraced gardens, in which Doc grew herbs and medicinal plants for use in his practice. He and his wife Callie were trying to run the place as a bed and breakfast inn, though guests were not very frequent. Steps climbed to a door above the mill race, where water poured across an overshot water wheel. The mill was functional, and Nelm's buckwheat flour and cornmeal were highly prized by customers at the cooperative. Callie met them inside, her fair hair tied back in a ponytail. She led them to a porch overlooking the mill pond. Her little girl, Susanna, brought out a tray of sliced tomatoes and cucumbers, served on thin pieces of bread. Florence Avery followed with a stoneware pitcher of iced tea, in which wedges of lemon were floating. Fletch began to breathe more easily. Things here seemed uncomplicated and peaceful. The folk of assembly appeared to move through life as gently as the ducks paddling on the mill pond. From further down the street came the laughter of children playing in the shady yard of one of the houses. Only the faint sound of a television set served as a reminder that, in the outside world, Jimmy Carter was planning a campaign kickoff in Alabama in his bid for a second term as president, and that American hostages were still being held in Iran. Later in the evening, Fletch went to the basement to sort through some of the boxes that they had stored there during the first part of the move. The light was at the bottom of the stairs rather than the top. Fletch knew that when his father had lived here as a boy, he had been frightened by the basement and refused to go down unless someone went before him and turned on the light. Finally, Fletcher's grandfather had rigged up a long cord by which you could turn on the light from the top of the stairs. It passed beneath a small wooden wheel and ran up the banister through several metal rings. A quick tug, and the light snapped on. At the bottom of the stairs, he sat down and began to go through the items he had packed away. Most were relics from early childhood. Among them a stuffed cat called Bagpuss, and a little rubber squirrel he had found on the playground during 2nd grade and given the name Jacques Perry. There was also a small collection of picture books, including 3 Billy Goats Gruff, the 3 Little Pigs, and the Boy at the Dyke. They were stained, damaged by silverfish and mildew. The 3 Little Pigs had been the most frightening one when Fletch was small. One illustration showed the wicked old wolf peering in through a narrow window. His face was half hidden, and the single visible eye was filled with ravenous greed. It occurred to him that he had been sorting through these things, as if explaining them to a companion sitting beside him. The feeling came so gradually that Fletch never considered it until he got up to leave. Someone else was here. He scanned the corners of the basement and began to be slightly afraid. During all the times he had visited his grandparents, he could not remember ever having been down here alone. Ductwork sprouted from the old furnace and ran along the walls and ceiling as if seeking the light. A cylindrical water heater stood in one corner, beside a long, old-fashioned freezer. Beyond it was a dark gap in the wall. "That's the place," he thought. "The cold cellar. Someone's back there." Nothing moved among the shadows. Fletch took one quick look up the stairs to the friendly light of the kitchen, then walked over to the recess. Beyond a small wooden door, a set of steps descended to a narrow brick chamber with an arched ceiling, its floor lower than the rest of the basement. Fletch remembered being told that the cold cellar had been used for the storage of fruit and vegetables in the days before electricity. The bricks were cool and smelled faintly of earth. Almost no light penetrated the little room, but by feeling his way along the wall he quickly found the end. Blindly, he ran his fingers along the rear wall, half expecting another door. No door here. No way out. He spun around, searching frantically for the pale light. He could scarcely breathe. The small, close space had become a well of anguish, pouring into him like a flood. He fled back into the light, fighting for air. "Fletch!" His father was at the top of the stairs, his voice low and urgent. "Come up here, quick!" Fletch grabbed the box of books and ran up the steps, trying to look as if nothing had happened. His father motioned for him to be quiet and come to the window. In a pool of luminescence cast by one of the outside lights, a gray fox posed, looking intently toward the window. Its calm gaze met Fletch's for a moment before it turned and melted into the night. "A gray fox," his father marveled. "That's the first wild one I've seen since before you were born." Fletch searched the limits of the dark yard, hoping for another glimpse. "Are they common around here?" His father shook his head. "No, but you hear of people seeing them now and again. The deer and raccoons are plentiful, though. And when I was younger than you, I once ran into a black bear less than a mile from here." He laughed quietly. "That's when I made up my mind I'd move to the city when I grew up. No bears left, I'm sure, and probably not many of those foxes. But it's wild out here. These woods are deep." These woods are deep. Exploring the old house that night by lamplight, Fletch wondered how far the forest extended. He left the yellow room and closed the door softly, casting an uneasy glance down the hall toward the back stairs, which led to the attic and the basement. He went into his bedroom and turned on the lights. Bright and dark. Mark Forrester filled his last pipe of the day and lit it. sending the smoke of half and half tobacco into the open air through the window of the study. He held his pipes in great affection, considering them old friends. They served as a tangible connection with his grandfather, long departed, whom he hoped to see again in heaven. From the trees at the edge of the yard, Mark could hear the chirring and cheeping of night creatures. Sounds of the country, he thought. Not like Atlanta. No traffic, no police sirens. He had been truthful earlier in the evening when he told Fletch that he was glad of the move. It would mean less money, almost no money, in fact, since the pastorate carried no set salary. But such things had a way of working out in assembly. People shared what they had in common, and there was always more than enough to go around. What worried him was far less substantial. Mark turned from the window and settled into his Morris chair, slipping the metal rods back 2 notches, so that the chair reclined into a more comfortable position. His hand moved to the leather-bound book resting on the tobacco stand, Archbishop Wake's translation of some of the letters of the Apostolic Fathers. He had been reading The Shepherd of St. Hermas in the evenings. The pages were marred by foxing and damp, and he turned them carefully, studying the marginal notes left in dark brown ink by another reader a century and a half before. See also Barnabas, and later Origen. Angels may become men or demons, and again from the latter they may rise to be men or angels. Also Gregory of Nyssa on the soul's 2 brothers, bright and dark. The Wog, Le Loup-garou. The notes were in reference to an odd passage about 2 angels, one of righteousness, the other of iniquity, which urged human beings toward good or evil ends. Mark put down the book and glanced toward the window, his mind turning to a prayer for himself and his son. There would be benefits to living in assembly, but there would be dangers as well, dangers not found in other places. What will I do when she comes for him? Because she will, sooner or later. That day in the hospital I knew. Would she have saved him otherwise? It wasn't a bargain, his life or his soul, nothing that simple. Mark had struggled with the decision to come back here after so many years. Now he prayed earnestly that he had made the right choice. Cottonmouth. Cotton Wills moved cautiously, checking his snares along the narrow path through the swamp, guided only by the moonlight on the ancient stone markers. He scarcely needed any light at all. Every hill and gully between the swamp and the town was familiar to him. Cotton seldom hunted with firearms, preferring to set traps for small game, moving from one part of the forest to another as the animals became wary. It kept meat on the table, and that meant more money for beer. It wasn't unusual for him to vanquish most of a 12-pack during the course of a night, which came out to 60 or 70 cans a week. That took a wedge out of his paycheck, and now that the plant had cut him back to 3/4 time, he was starting to feel the pinch where it hurt. He knew Carla obtained milk and bread and vegetables from the cooperative at no cost, and he put up with it, though it galled him. Half the people in town were communists right here in North Georgia. It was a disgrace. Cotton growled and muttered a curse at assembly. He had ways of making money. There was the bait shop up on the highway, which kept Carla where he could watch her. If people stopped buying crickets and red wigglers, he could set up a still down in the bottoms and start making moonshine, as his father and grandfather had done. He recalled the soft gleam of the liquor in heavy glass jugs, the pure pleasure of it on his tongue, and the trail of fire it traced down his throat with the first swallow. The formula was foolproof. Make plenty, make it good, and sell it cheap. Cotton had once had aspirations. He had graduated high school with honors, enrolled in Georgia Tech on a scholarship, made straight A's, started drinking, and flunked out. It was goodbye quantum mechanics and hello Milwaukee, simple as that. Just as well. Who wanted to work in a lab for a measly $30,000 a year when there was blood and beer and all these miles of wilderness? Something thrashed in the undergrowth, and Cotton parted the brambles to find a cottontail rabbit caught in one of the snares. That made 4 just this evening, but this one was small, scarcely worth the trouble of preparing it. Cotton drew a knife from the sheath on his belt and pressed the struggling creature against the earth with his boot. He skinned it with a few swift strokes and immediately began to eat it raw. There was only one thing on earth that Cotton Wills enjoyed more than alcohol, and that was the taste of hot blood and living meat. Crouching beside a trickling streamlet, he cleaned the blade and held it up to the moonlight. The small knife was one of his favorites, an old Skinner with a blade of heavy carbon steel. There were things in the swamp he feared, but the knife gave him reassurance. He paused at the cry of a screech owl, then became completely still. A water moccasin slipped through the water, its thick, powerful body moving sinuously along the edge of the bank. Cotton followed its progress and felt an odd sense of kinship. The old snake was very much like himself, swift, quiet, and deadly. Cotton the cottonmouth. He smiled as he got to his feet, moving deeper into the darkness of the path. The snake had never even cared he was there. I hope you've enjoyed Chapter 1 of The Forked Ways. Chapter 2 will follow next week. This recording was produced by R.J. Williams, who also provided the music. The artwork is by Virginia Williams. I'm Beau Farr. The book and recording of The Forked Ways are copyright 2018 by Beau Farr. All rights reserved.